How are you? Welcome to Critical Moves of Telesur. What are we talking about today? Well, it's the growing rejection on the worldwide scale against the agreement of the century that last week the President of the United States pulled out of his sleeve. An agreement in favor of who? Is it fair? Is it equitable? Who agreed it? What are the geopolitical implications might this agreement have? Let's analyze this. Let's begin. Let's hear some reactions by both sides of what they think. Many of the Arab nations have accepted it. They think it's good. They think it's great. It's a great beginning. It's something fantastic if we're able to achieve it. It's probably the most hardest agreement that will be attained. In a negotiation, when people say it's hard, they say it's harder even than Palestinians and the Israeli agreeing. The agreement of the century it's the best opportunity. We're not going to let it go. I just want to thank you for everything you've done for the state of Israel. You've been the best friend that Israel has had in the White House, and I think we can keep on doing history. From here, we can say to Israel that we are cutting any relationship with the State of Israel and the United States. We have said the same to the United States. This includes the rupture of relationships in terms of security. We totally reject the agreement because it declares Israel like Jerusalem, the capital of Israel. However, we think peace is still possible. We reject the agreement because it does not fulfill the rights of the Palestinian people. This is the opinion of the Arab League. How about if we do a map of what has been the Israeli occupation? Palestine, an X-ray of the Israeli occupation. The illegal occupation goes back to the past century when the Zionist movement began to be stronger and they wanted to have a state for the Israelis. Palestine, located next to the Mediterranean Sea and crossed by the Jordan Sea, by the Jordan River, has been located. It was first controlled by the Ottoman Empire and up until now illegally occupied by the Israelis. After the Ottoman Empire stopped occupying, the UK had a tutelage over this land. After the Holocaust, there was a pressure to establish an Israeli state. The initial idea was to divide the UK territory, to be divided by the Palestinian and Israeli. The Palestinian state was founded in 1948. Ever since then, the Nakba began, which is the destruction or catastrophe. This is the tragedy for the Palestinian people. Over 700,000 fled to other lands or were expelled. In 1967, after the so-called Six-Day War, Israel occupied the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Mount, the Gaza Strip, the East Bank, and the heights of Golan. Another 500,000 Palestinians were forced to leave their lands. Palestine was reduced to two parts: the West Bank and Gaza. There's a blockade that cannot let people go in or out. Gaza has a border of 51 kilometers with the state of Israel and Egypt. The West Bank says that is where the Jerusalem is now located. And they say that this is the capital of Israel, that up until then was in Tel Aviv. This created indignation in all of the world. Now let's see what the agreement is about. This agreement was not consulted with Palestine. January 28th from the White House, and along with the Prime Minister of Israel, the agreement was revealed. The project was very rapidly rejected by the international community because it makes the rights of the Palestinian invisible. And they propose the following: to create a state called New Palestine that would exclude the Israeli colonies, to continue with the Jewish settlements, give the Jordan Valley to Israel. The New Palestine would be the result of an agreement between Israel, the OLP, and Hamas. If the OLP and Hamas reject the agreement, the United States will cancel all of the economic support to the Palestine. If Israel rejects it, the United States would reject it, would stop supporting Israel economically. Although this is not feasible because the money for the Palestinian refugees was already withheld by the United States. The New Palestine will not have an army, but only a police force. They will also have to pay for security services. The Arab population will be expelled from Palestine and taken to the New Palestine. This means that Jerusalem will be part of Israel, and the new Palestinian capital would still to be seen where it would be. There will be no. Egypt will give land to New Palestine to construct an airport and factories, but the Palestinians will not be able to live in those territories. To build a road between the Gaza Strip and the East Bank, there will be a road. The borders of the Gaza Strip will be opened through the water openings. According to this agreement, in New Palestine, there will be elections in 2 months, after which Israel will liberate the Palestinian prisoners in the lapse of 3 years. The Palestinians will use the Israeli ports and airports until they have their own in New Palestine in 5 years. Now it's time to see websites. For example, let's begin with Aurora. It says 2/3 of the Israelis thinks that the political authorities is corrupt. Almost 2/3 of the Israeli population think that their leadership is corrupt. This is due to a yearly poll, and they were asked on several aspects. You ask yourself, why do we say this? Why are we speaking about this? Because later we're going to speak about Benjamin Netanyahu, who is a key element in this controversy. According to this organization, that 46.5% of the people think that their leadership is corrupt is very high. Before, it used to only be 43%, which could among the Jewish Israelis, this is like 80% of the population. The army is the highest regarded, and it has a general respect. Then it's the president's office and the Supreme Court, but the level of trust on the presidency and the Congress is limited. Not everybody believes them, and only 14% trusts in political parties. We are also speaking. We're also analyzing the election systems. Then El Dia, it says, to survive the cold weather in a refugee camp in the Gaza Strip. This is the story of a man who lives with his family there. And they say that it's totally cold, and it's a good excuse to gather the family around a fire. This man sells things in the market, and they also have help with United Nations Refugee World Agency. allows them to survive. But as they say, it's harder every time. Gaza is considered unlivable ever since they began 2020. The Gaza Strip has the highest unemployment rate. This is 52%. It doesn't have a job. This means that the people can't have heat in their houses. The situation is even worse for young people and women. This makes that 80% of the population depend on the help of the UNRWA. After 13 years of the Israeli blockade through air, sea, and land, controlling everything that comes in and out of those 360 square kilometers, have left the Strip in extreme conditions. And let's not forget that this is the worst conditions of the year. They live under the poverty line, living with under 174 cents a day. And in winter, one has to decide whether to keep the heater on or warm clothes. I would like to suggest an article, in this case, called "The Agreement of the Year Denies the Existence of Palestine." It's been written by Anwar al-Spousa. It was published on January 29. It says that in 1949, when the General Assembly of the United Nations decided to divide Palestinian territory, they did it without consulting the Palestinians. That the Palestinians are not able to have representation. This is part of what Edward Said said. This is Orientalism. It's a speech of saying another as incapable of governing himself. The agreement of the century is only thinking that their policies have to control all of the rest. Then they controlled. They accepted that Jerusalem was the place where they were going to have their offices. Then what they've also done is eliminate the funds they gave to this UN fund for refugees. And with that, what they did was do away with all of the topics that the international community find as imperative for a peace process between Palestine and Israel. And any agreement should be done with the full acceptance of all parties. And the return of the refugees that were expelled ever since 1948. To do it in another way, according to this author, has a breakage of the international pillars of our society based on the UN Charter. Let's go to our first pause, but we also invite you to participate with us through our question on Twitter. The world rejection grows to this agreement of the century. It was done to solve the problems with Israel without the consent of Palestine. What is at play with this plan? Come and participate with us. Look at the maps that illustrate what would be the current situation and what would be the upcoming situation in case that this agreement would go through. Based on this, you give... The President of the States says that the agreement is a great plan. Well, no, to be precise, this is the plan of Netanyahu and Jewish settlers. The announcement of Trump and Netanyahu is a war against the UN Charter and international law and the international legitimacy of Oslo Agreement and all of the other agreements signed. This idea of legitimizing the settlers and expelling people against their will only has one word. These are war crimes. We are here to specifically protest against the agreement of the century. We will confront it with all our forces. We come from a refugee camp. Here we are, the jihad, and the front against the agreement of the century and Trump administration. We are here to protest against this, and we want you to know that Palestine is not the Jerusalem is the capital of the Muslims. There has been a betrayal. We cannot call it an agreement, but this is the betrayal of the century. Israel and the United States have signed this agreement with their betrayal plans. This will not bring peace. We think that this agreement will only bring the war. I am here to protest against the agreement of the century. As a Palestinian, is the least I can do. We have to do something for the Palestinians. We reject this agreement. We do not accept it in any way. Now, it's necessary to establish a context, because the facts don't happen in an isolated way. Let's see what happens in Israel, what happens in the U.S., and why do they come up with this idea? On March 2nd, in Israel, there will be the third parliamentary election in less than a year, because the results and the forces in parliament that was dissolved last December have not allowed the confirmation of a government. The scenario with the upcoming elections seem to be the same thing, a technical tie between the two biggest parties, the conservative of Benjamin Netanyahu and the blue and white party, Mr. Gantz. This will be a very big challenge against Netanyahu, who has serious charges of corruption against him. It was said that the Prime Minister was trying to delay the accusations against him. In the United States, the situation is similar. With the upcoming elections of November 3rd, Trump has gone through with some of his promises. He reduced the unemployment to 3.5, the lowest level in years. Wall Street has increased 30%, while the salaries have increased 3% yearly. The economy is growing for 10 years straight after the 2009 debacle. However, the analyst says what the impact will be of the aggressive way Trump has to do business. He's supremacist, racist, he doesn't like women, and this will go against the people who are migrants, who are Latins, and this machista attitude against the LGBT right to abort, and how the United States is not even participating with the human rights agreements. This will have a consequence on the votes that will be taken tomorrow. The commercial war with China that was unilaterally declared, although now you can see that there is some differences. The assassination of Soleimani, which just turned on the alarms for a big conflict, and the distance from allies that used to be their allies in Europe. This shows that the United States is becoming isolated from the rest of the world, and just makes the nationalist system even more clear to define President Trump. However, the biggest process that is important is the impeachment process and obstruction of Congress, because they did not accept their word on it, and they asked for the Ukrainian Senate to give a written affidavit. So let's start the analysis here in our next analysis. We have a Palestinian lady who is member of the Palestinian World Parliament. Well, now we're speaking about this so-called agreement of the century. An agreement for who? In favor of who? Well, this is an agreement between Trump and Netanyahu, because it's an agreement that goes through with the Israeli intentions, because they do away with the Palestinian state. And what this does is reduce the possibilities of finding peace. This is if you want to establish an agreement. Why not go through with the Oslo agreements that were signed by Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin? And Bill Clinton was the witness to this. So once again, it's an American president just erasing all of the advance of another president. Just like Trump did before with Iran. Well, you're saying that once again a U.S. president is erasing pacts and imposing himself in favor of allies. But in this case, we're not speaking of any American president. We're speaking of Donald Trump, whose bonds with the state of Israel. I'm speaking about his daughter Ivanka, Jared. These are very strong ties. And they have decision positions in the White House. Well, I guess we do have to analyze the support that this network might have. Let's not forget that the first draft of this was written by Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of Trump. And let's not also forget that his political campaign is financed by the Jewish companies, and then is when the position changed. So what I'm saying of a shame when we speak that Palestine accepted in the 73, they accepted to make their land over 22% of the Palestinian territory, and now they're offering them 11%. So this is not an agreement in itself, and the power of coercion and that the United States might take to attack over this area. And of course, this presents a panorama where there is no consensus in a general sense that would impose the international law. So I guess we're understanding this a little bit better. But additionally to that, we're also speaking of an electoral year, both for Netanyahu as well as for Trump. Well, the inform that you just presented, it was clearly seen the political need and the urgency that both presidents, Netanyahu and Trump, have to cover up other type of disastrous reports, because there is a trial against acts of corruption. And President Trump will face an impeachment trial that is in front of the American people. So what they need is and yeah, this is an agreement with Netanyahu, but that has brought the need to cover all of the evidence and trying to tell Netanyahu as the great solution to all of our to all of the troubleship. Well, speaking geopolitical cases, what are the implications that this plan might have should it go through with it?
Evidentemente, habría una confrontación previa con toda la comunidad árabe que se ha manifestado en su contra.
And there would be a repercussion on some parts of society. There have been the Arab countries who have rejected this. But in the case that this agreement goes through, what would the geopolitical implications be? Well, this is like oh, I think that this would be an act of war. And this would be the complete application of the apartheid. I think that now, as you have you said, I think the first act of recognizing Jerusalem as the Israeli capital just marked a turning point, because this is a violation of all types of international law. The resolutions of the United Nations. It's 2234 of December 33 of 2016. This is the last resolution. This is the last of the. And this speaks that there is a recognition. But it consecrates it has a clear influence on all of the rest of the countries. And his decision to divide, he would give everybody else the images, and he would only have and this, we hope that this doesn't have an awful ending, because if people are mad, they will take the force in their own hands. Anyway, there are different actors who have to make decisions on this. It has to be the quartet who make this decision, because the United States lost any credibility to become a mediator. Thank you very much, Rafael, for the time you have given our audience. See you soon.
Muy buenas tardes. Recuerde,
remember, we have a strategic move through which you can send us your comments. This is what we can have on our Twitter account. There are several answers right now. Others have just retweeted, with which they express their agreement with our statement. But you still have time to give us your input on this topic. Meanwhile, let me tell you that after the pause, we will have a very special guest to our work, because it's excellent, because he explains it with the map what is going on. The guest is, we'll have to wait until after the pause.
¿Con qué antecedentes considera
What
el
is the
Estado de Israel
background
este
with which
acuerdo de Siglo
Israel
para lograr la paz
attains this
palestina? También
century
lo revisamos en
agreement?
nuestra jugada crítica.
This is also what we're going to review in our critical move.
Con el denominado acuerdo del
With the
siglo que el
so-called
presidente
agreement of the
palestino
century that
Mahmoud Abbas ha
the
denominado la
president
bofetada del siglo,
of
Israel y su
Palestine
principal
has said
aliado
it's
Estados Unidos
the slap
pretenden
in the
continuar
face
con
of
la
the century.
política de exterminio
President
iniciada
Trump
durante la
and
creación del
Netanyahu
Estado
has
sionista
continued
en
have decided to
1948
continue
con la
this
anuncio de las Naciones
this
Unidas.
siege on
Sería un
Palestine.
intento de
It
darle
would
un
be an
cariz legal
attempt
al genocidio
to
del pueblo
make
palestino,
a
la
legal
colonización de
to
sus
try to
tierras y la
make it as a
progresiva
legal
destrucción de
effort
una cultura
to
milenaria
try to
azotada por
destroy
guerras occidentales
a whole
desde épocas
culture,
tan
a whole
lejanas como
country.
las cruzadas. ¿Cómo se entiende que sea el
How is
gobierno
this
que
understood that it's
presuntamente
the
representa a los judíos, el que
government
haga
that
sufrir al
represents the
pueblo
Jewish that
palestino
make the
condiciones similares a las
Palestinians
que
to
sufriera
suffer
el suyo de manos de la
almost the same
Alemania nazi
conditions
durante la
what
Segunda Guerra
they
Mundial?
suffered with
Los
the Nazis
palestinos
in the
viven
World
en
War
condición
II.
de
The
refugiados en su
Palestinians
propio
live like
territorio y en
refugees in their
naciones
own
vecinas en Oriente
territories.
Medio. La continua
The
expansión de los
continuing
colonos judíos,
expansions
las
of
periódicas
Jewish
agresiones que han causado
colonies
cerca de 10.000
have
palestinos
caused
muertos en las
10,000
últimas 2
Palestinians
décadas
dead
y la
in the last
construcción
2
de muros han
decades.
traído como
And the built of
consecuencia el
walls
aumento de
have
la
brought the
pobreza hasta
consequence
alcanzar
of
al
poverty
53% de la
up
población
until
árabe, con un
43%
desempleo
are
de más del
poor,
50%
with over
en regiones
50%
como
of
Gaza y una
unemployment
profunda
in
recesión de
Gaza
la
and
economía que
a
depende
profound
básicamente del Estado,
economic
así como de las donaciones y remesas
crisis,
desde el extranjero.
as well as
Las
not being able
limitaciones
to
en el
receive
tránsito de
money
personas y productos
from
debido a las
other
barreras
countries.
físicas y la
There are
detención
also
arbitraria de
physical
cientos de
barriers
puntos de
to
control
receive things,
imposibilitan el
and
comercio.
there
Israel
are
bloquea la
points that
posibilidad
you
de
cannot
Palestina
pass
de
through.
exportar sus enseres. También
Palestinians
restringe
are
el
able
acceso
to
a derechos
export
humanos
their
básicos
things,
como
and they
la
restrict
educación, la
the
salud,
basic human
alimentos y
rights
agua
as
potable. El pueblo palestino
health,
vive una crisis
education.
humanitaria. Según
The
cifras de la
Palestinian
ONU,
people
la
have
mitad de
a
sus 5 millones de
sanitary
habitantes requiere
emergency.
asistencia. El 25% de los
25%
hogares
of the
están
homes
afectados
are
por la
affected
inseguridad
by
alimentaria.
insecurity,
Medio
by
millón de
food
niños no
insecurity.
cuentan con educación de
Thousands
calidad.
of kids
Un millón
don't
de
have
personas presenta problemas de
quality
salud y malnutrición. La
quality
ocupación y
education. The
privatización de los
occupation and
acuíferos
privatization
palestinos han
is
causado
very
que el 80% de
is
ese
very
recurso
nearby
vital se
to our
destine a Israel,
cause.
lo cual afecta además la actividad agrícola en la nación árabe.
Ya está con nosotros entonces
Well,
el doctor
now we have
Carchi, abogado, experto en
Raimundo
temas de
Carchi.
Oriente
He's
Medio.
an expert
Yo
on the
prácticamente
Middle
me tomo el
East.
atrevimiento,
I
con la complicidad del director del programa, por supuesto, de cambiar
have to change a little
el
bit
escenario de la jugada
the
crítica de hoy.
scenario of
Doctor,
critical
bienvenido
move
a
of
nuestro
today.
espacio, porque yo sé que usted le gusta
Welcome,
mucho
Doctor,
la
because I know
geopolítica, y
that
cuando
you
hablamos de geo,
like very
nos
much
estamos
the
refiriendo a la
geopolitics, and
geolocalización,
we
que
need
tan
to
importante es
locate
para que las
this.
personas comprendan
All of
lo que
the
el
things
mapa
you
nos
were talking
ilustra,
about.
¿cierto?
Así es. En primer lugar, muchas gracias por la
Well, in the
invitación.
first place, thank you for the
Gracias al
invitation.
canal por tenerme otra vez aquí. Estamos hablando mucho del
We're
acuerdo.
talking about the
del siglo.
agreement of the
El
century.
acuerdo, usualmente, y
agreement-
perdóname hacer valer mi condición de abogado, cuando se me plantea un problema
When I'm
jurídico
talking about
político,
a
necesariamente
political
tengo que
or a
buscar
legal problem, I have to find
vaciarlo en un tratado internacional, en
in
un
an
convenio
international
internacional,
party, in an
en
international
una ley
covenant,
internacional,
in international
etcétera,
law,
inclusive hasta en constituciones y leyes internas
even in
de nuestros
constitutions and
países.
laws.
Y cuando yo veo lo que ha sucedido,
And when I see what
no
happened,
fue de ninguna manera un acuerdo, ni del siglo,
and
ni
when
del
we see
año,
what
ni
happened,
del
this
día.
was not an agreement of the
Hasta el
century,
mismo
of the
Trump, que
day or of
ustedes
the
acaban
year.
de pasar,
Sí.
Trump
cuando se
himself,
refirió a
when
la
he
gravedad
spoke
del asunto,
about the
dijo
seriousness
que en
of the
los
situation, he
negocios
said that
se
in
dicen
business,
que
it
este
is
es tan
said
difícil como el
that this
problema
problem
árabe-israelí.
is
Negocio.
that the problem is
Bueno,
just
lo
as
ve como
hard
un
as the
negocio.
solution you
Este hombre de
propose.
negocios.
Absolutamente. Pero está él de acuerdo consigo
But-
mismo cuando habla de negocio, porque fue un negocio.
This was
Nada
a
más
deal.
hay los billones de dólares que están bailando.
It's not
en
only
la
the thousands
palestra.
of
Ya
dollars
por ahí
that
entonces
are
Pero la
vamos a ir
realidad-
dancing
descubriendo terreno,
around.
doctor. En lugar de acuerdo del siglo, el negocio del siglo.
Instead of the agreement of the
Absolutamente es el
century, it could
negocio
be
del
the
siglo,
business
es
of
el
the
negocio del
century.
siglo. Pero no
Yeah,
solo esto,
It's
sino
not only
hasta en los
this.
negocios
We
debe
can,
haber dos
because
partes.
in the
Un
business there
vendedor,
has to
un
be two
comprador, un
parts, the
deudor, un
seller and the
acreedor,
vendor.
etcétera. Hasta en este mismo caso, no
In this
existe
case, there is
la otra parte. Y yo lo
there's
figuro
no
así,
other
perdón,
part.
Una parte y un intermediario.
Si usted me permite
Well, I am
figurarlo
the-
un poquitico así,
if you let
no
me
chabacanamente,
let me
pero
just
sí no a la altura
explain
del-
this a
del-
little bit
del
better.
programa. Mire, se anunció un
It was
matrimonio
announced that
de
there was going to
gala
be
de dos personajes
that there was going to be
importantísimos.
two guests.
Se montaron el show invitaron a la gente,
They invited all of the people.
estaban los padres
Then the
del
parents
novio,
of the
estaba la
groom
gente
were
del
there,
novio,
the mother of the
muchas
groom were
otras
there, and
gentes.
many other
Solo faltó
people.
la novia y sus familiares que no sabían nada.
It was
de lo
only
que estaba
about the,
Bueno,
Ni
aquí,
siquiera fue un
an
matrimonio
aunt,
ni
arreglado.
ni siquiera.
an aunt of the
Entonces,
groom.
¿qué pasa?
So,
Dos personajes,
two
oh
characters,
sorpresa, ambos con problemas
both
internos
with internal
cuantiosos.
problems that are
No
substantial.
solo en cuanto a elecciones se refiere, que también lo
Not
tiene,
only in terms of
sino de muchos aspectos. Porque
education.
Netanyahu tiene varios juicios encima.
Es correcto.
Él y su señora esposa.
Like Netanyahu,
El
he
señor
has several
Trump tiene el
lawsuits
problema
against
que
him and his
todavía no ha
wife.
solucionado.
Trump still has a problem.
Entonces, ellos resolvieron entre sí. Pero yo que he seguido, te decía
And
hace
everything,
rato,
as I
desde
told
los
you a
6
minute
años,
ago,
yo estoy familiarizado con el problema palestino. Entonces, de todos los acuerdos
and of
anteriores,
all of the
de
previous
todas las
agreements, of
resoluciones
all of the
anteriores de las
resolutions,
Naciones Unidas y de otros organismos internacionales, el peor de todos
the
es
worst
el
of all
actual.
¿Por
is
qué?
the current
Por
one.
cuanto que le
Because
quita a los palestinos
you
todo.
take away from
Inclusive
Palestinians
lo que-
everything.
La partida de nacimiento que dio vida a Israel, que es la
Even
resolución
the-
181 del
even
29
the
de
paper
noviembre
I
de
saw is,
1947,
Is written
le
in
debió
Israel.
haber dado vida a un
They
territorio
should have given
palestino
life to
desaparecido
Palestinian
en
territory that
en esta
disappeared.
zapaja, decimos en árabe, en ese negocio.
In
Peor que
this
negocio,
business.
dicen, las traducciones de todos los diccionarios que yo he visto,
So all of
se habla
all
de
of the
ganga.
translations speak of the
Ganga
of the
o no- o
sale.
negocio. Entonces, dentro de esto,
So,
los palestinos
in this,
perdieron
you
todo.
can say that there have been
obtiene
no.
ipso facto inmediatamente todo lo que se le está ofreciendo al señor Trump sin título jurídico de ninguna naturaleza.
So this
tenemos
without
una comparación.
Here we have a comparison.
Sí, cómo no.
Let me allow you. While the Palestinians are given the opportunity to negotiate with those who have been negotiating for 100 years. So they leave the Palestinians outside of any agreement. And the worst thing that has happened to the Palestinians is this. But I would like to speak about the geopolitics. In 1907, 8 years from the Zionist movement party that was held in Basilea, so Theodor Herzl spoke about speaking a terrorist group. So they did not put Palestine as the destiny. They were thinking of other territories. But some said, we have no relations, historical relations with Palestine. So they sent 2 rabbis to Palestine. And so the telegram they sent, still exists, says, the bride is very pretty, but unfortunately, she has a country. Because what they say, a country without land is not a wedding.
Asesinaron muchos de ellos, pero 57 millones de mártires de la humanidad costó aquella guerra de la Segunda Guerra Mundial.
That the Second World War cost us a lot of lives. So in 1977, the 6 countries, imperialist countries, European countries, met.
No estaban los otomanos, solo europeos.
It was only the Europeans. So they studied the situation of their empires. And they said that in the 55 time lapse, they were going to lose their territories and they were going to disappear. So this is why they asked the Prime Minister, the British camp, who had called on this convention of geographers, of scientists. He asked on how to avoid the fall of our empires. And what they said was, Asia for 100 years has not risen their heads, except for China. And look what's happened to China. Africa is exhausted with a lot of sectarism and the prince in danger. And there's a place in the Atlantic, between the Atlantic and the And the coast, well, here in this part, they all speak the same religion. They speak of the same stories and histories. And they're the same people from here to here. Now that we can have it on the map, we have in this zone, we have Palermo, Mandel, the Suez Canal, Gibraltar. So this would be a... So what did they determine in 1907 in London? That is not possible that these countries follow the dispositions. And there's a new paradigm by a piece of clothes that we left there. Look where Palestine is. Where the Mediterranean Sea, it's from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. So it divides the Arab world. Here we have Syria, Jordania, Palestine, Iraq, and the Gulf countries. We have many cities there. And then this political party, that was the Palestinians against all of the imperialistics of Europe and Jerusalem. And ever since, we've had this problem in the Middle East. Let's say that beyond the historical and cultural aspects, Palestine was becoming in something geostrategical. When you speak about religion, here in Palestine, with the nationality, it was 6%. There is 6% of the state is Palestine, is historically Palestine. It has been said that the Jewish passed a long time ago through there. However, this is a land that has 10,000 years of history. Of this 10,000 years, all of the empires known to history has passed by. From Mongols, Portugal, Spain, and everybody left, including the Crusaders. So the idea is that we're not going to learn about the Jewish religion. So let's say that this equation has nothing to do now. And that Israel be the country that is going to gather all of the Jews in the world. This is something hard because we have the diaspora, and the people who are in the diaspora, they're happy living there with their economy. So what is left now? How to make this disappear? These people have been fighting for every 80 years. So now the solution of Mr. Trump and Netanyahu just doesn't work. So tell me if you agree with me. There's a symbology here that hides this agreement of the century. An agreement that Trump pulls out of his sleeve a day after the 75th day of celebration of the Holocaust. This is not chance. I want to tell you something. Whenever you want to disappear a state, you have to have something as a base. I ask myself, one of us ever heard Netanyahu or Trump of an agreement, of a treaty, of a constitution, of a resolution of United Nations, of human rights? Not at all. Did they do it in a naive way, or is it that Trump and Netanyahu don't know about these international pacts regarding Palestine, the existence of Palestinians? No. They know, everybody knows it by heart. resolutions after resolution ever since 1947 until now. The country that has been mostly condemned by the United Nations out of the 109 countries is Israel because of not committing to all of the words of the agreements. Then 128 agreements voted. When I spoke of the Israeli state or the Muslim country, this is not an agreement. Sorry, I meant the. Well, it has to be rejected as it's been rejected. Who have been causing the Palestinian incidents ever since 1899 up until now? These are the former imperialist countries that dominated our lands. But they still have this mentality. It is not from Latin America. There is no consensus in Latin America. Then in Asia, same thing. China has already spoke their mind, and they say that they don't agree because this doesn't foresee any of the agreements of the UN. And let's see, Saudi Arabia, which is one of the allies of the US in this zone. Of course, it doesn't want to speak much about it, but they say it's important to respect the right of the Palestinians. Look, it's important not to take seriously the words of the Arab leaders. We are sick of saying the problem is not Arabs against Jews. The problem is not religious, nor racial. Just like we have Jews in New York, and they protest against Israel and pro-Palestinian. We do have Arab leaders, but the problem is that when we have to speak about the Palestinians, then they just take out their flags, but they are contrary to the rights of the Palestinians, to the rights of their own population, a country that gives the United States $1 trillion for a flight that Trump did to Saudi Arabia, and they come back with $1 trillion, and a fourth of the Palestinian people are hungry and massacring a country that needs respect. So the thing that we have to leave behind is that the news media have tried to exploit some of the news that are ongoing. So it's necessary to take out of this game the racial element, the cultural element. Look, the loveliest poems in Arab have been written by Jews. I have a book, how the Jewish cry when they see the occupied Palestine. And they say that they would like to go back to Cairo. So the problem is, it's humane. With that conclusion, I want to cut off. As you see, we always need more time to reflect on what's going on in our world. A world that keeps on rotating, and that this year, that just in this first month, has produced a lot of news. Thank you very much for being here. Let's go to our conclusions.
Un acuerdo o una bofetada.
An agreement
El
or a
denominado
slap in the
acuerdo del
face.
siglo o negocio del siglo,
Is
como
it
decía el Dr. Capchi,
is this
no
the,
hace
the
sino
business of the
legitimar el
year?
expolio
This
que
just
por décadas se le ha propinado al
legitimates
Estado de Israel a Palestina,
this
donde quedan las agresiones
this
físicas y
attack
psicológicas
of
a ese pueblo árabe,
Israel on
que hay de los
Palestine.
constantes bombardeos del
What
ocupante
about the
sionista y
constant
el creciente
bombarding
bloqueo por
and the
aire, mar y
growing
tierra?
blockade?
Pues pasar la
Well,
página
just
es
to
uno
turn
de
the
los fines
page
ocultos de este
is
pacto
one of
sacado a
the
la luz justo
purposes
24
of this
horas
agreement.
después de haberse
24
conmemorado el
hours
Día del
after the
Holocausto.
celebration of the
Prohibido
Holocaust.
pecar de ingenuidad, lo decía mi invitado, la historia no
History
lo perdonaría.
will not
Por hoy
forgive
cerramos el tablero
this. For
geopolítico.
this